So like Robert said, I live in Narromine, which is the central west New South Wales. I've been here for about 8 years now. My partner is a fourth generation farmer. I met him over in Perth and we went to the UK together, then came back to the farm to have a child really. So I wear a few different hats. I've started a business called Farm Renewables Consulting just to do a bit of advisory work for like the government. And I also run the Renewables and Agriculture Conference, which obviously had to be cancelled this year, unfortunately. The first one was in Wagga Wagga last year. So what I'll be talking about today is a little bit about our story and our system of what we've done on our farm. So we're on 2,500 hectares. We have cotton as our main crop over summer, about 550 hectares of irrigated cotton. We grow wheat, barley, sorghum sometimes over winter. And we use a groundwater and surface water license, but 3/4 of our water really comes from groundwater. And this was from 2 deep water bores, which was previously driven just by diesel. So the cost of diesel, that's 3,000 a day, every day over the summer period when we were pumping water. So diesel costs were about 400,000 every year, and that's the highest cost on our farm. So obviously something had to be done about that. This is the cotton crop. This is what we're working towards, and we usually pick between about April and May, although we picked very late this year because of our extremely hot, dry summer that we had with the changing climates that we're all experiencing. But this is where we get 80% of our profit from for the farm. So in terms of what we did, so we ended up putting a 500 kilowatt solar diesel irrigation pump in, and that was the largest in the country that we know of. And we're off grid, so it uses the solar energy as much as possible during the day, and then switches over to diesel when we need to pump overnight. So it cost us $900,000 plus GST, so nearly $1 million. So it's a pretty massive upfront cost. We were able to use a New South Wales low interest loan at about 2% for about $250,000 of that 900K. And that's actually gone up to $1 million now because of the drought to help farmers out. So the economics of this system really worked for us. It was a 5-year payback. And that's because the cost of solar panels have come down so significantly over the last 10 years. We're able to pump about 60% of our water license now using solar only. So we changed the way that we operated on our farm from only watering and pumping during summer to now trying to pump a little bit of our water license every day of the year using solar, or a lot longer, maybe 9 months as opposed to 12 months, using solar energy to give us that really strong payback. So we're saving about 180,000 litres of diesel every year. And when you look at the cost of that, it's about $1 a litre when you take into consideration the rebates and the tax, and that's $180,000 savings every year. So we've had that system in since September 2018, so we're nearly 2 years in, and it's tracking to provide that 5-year payback. So for me, this is really building our resilience to future bad years that we might have with future droughts, or it's helping to cut that enormous cost that we had on energy. So another thing that we're really proud of, and is kind of my motivation, I did an environmental science degree back in uni, is that we're saving 500 tonnes of CO2 from entering the atmosphere every year because of that reduction in diesel. And that's equivalent to 40 households worth of energy use. So that's one farmer that's saving that amount of energy. So if you times that by 10, that's 5,000 tonnes that we could be reducing. So farmers, I feel, have a real potential to make significant impacts around emission reductions, and where I think there's huge potential for renewable energy in agriculture. So these dust storms are taken on my farm. One of the top ones, 2018, the end of 2018, and the last one was end of 2019. And these dust storms were happening first every few months and then every few weeks. It was just a terrible drought that we had out here. So to put in the 550 kilowatt solar diesel pump, it took about 3 to 4 months. This is just the progress shots, and you can see the last number 4 there. We launched it, which I'll talk about in a sec. But it needed 1 hectare of land to put in the 1,550 panels. And once it was in, with all the controllers and everything, it was working pretty much straight away. And while it's provided the economic payback and benefits that we were hoping for. You know, we have had quite a few teething problems, it being, you know, the first of its size in Australia, and the company learning kind of as they go as well. And I also work part-time, I have to say, for the company now that put in the system. So while there's been quite a few teething issues and it's taken a lot of everyone's time, they are still working on fixing this. And I feel like we've de-risked this type of development for other farmers, and, you know, the industry's learned from this to do better the next time. So we launched it in September the 2018 to quite a lot of media interest. We had Fiona Simpson, so NFF's president, Niall Blair, the Ag Minister at the time, came along, and about 100 community members and peak bodies that we invited to come along. But even though for us the payback is so strong and there's such positive environmental benefits that come out of it, we're just not seeing the uptake in these types of systems or renewables on farm. And there's a number of reasons for this that I know of from research, from my work with ReAqua, used to work in government with renewable energy as well. You know, the high capital cost is one, so that was obviously a big one for us. A lack of trust in suppliers, and that's why, you know, ReAqua had a very specific combined expertise and knowledge of solar and water pumping. And there's not many, I guess, businesses that specialise in both renewables and understand the way that farmers use energy, because it's often very seasonal. So that there's a scarcity of visible examples for farmers to learn from each other as well. We all know farmers like to look over the fence to see what the neighbours are doing when they do their business plans. So there's not enough of these kind of systems, I guess, for people to learn from. Which is why I ended up convening the Renewables and Agriculture Conference. The first one went really, really well. We had 250 people there on the day in Wagga Wagga. There's lots of farmers talking about amazing projects they've done on their farm and sharing their learnings and experiences. There's a few experts there to talk about what you need to consider and how to come up with a business case. And we also had an expo part of it, which was all around bringing together those kind of trusted suppliers. I tried to vet them as much as possible. I checked their references. I had the Clean Energy Council make sure they were part of their, you know, accredited suppliers, or there were no complaints against them. So it was a fantastic, positive day, and everybody wanted it to be an annual event. But given COVID, that's not going to happen really this year. I'm hoping the next one happens May 2021, but we'll see what happens with that. And I'm planning on moving it around, so it'll be in Victoria eventually. Who knows when though. So I just wanted to briefly cover off these are a couple of speakers that were at my, you don't have to read all that. These were a couple of speakers at my conference that I know about. So Kay Smith, she's in northern New South Wales. She had the first off-grid robotic dairy that they were looking at quotes of, you know, 100 grand to link up to the electricity network, and would have cost them $50,000 in electricity every year to run the robotic dairy. So they instead looked at a generator, batteries and solar. And by doing that, they're saving, you know, $50,000 in energy costs every year. So that's a really positive story, and that's working really well. They've trained the cows to be milked at any time that they want. And that's, you know, the way of the future really, like where instead of connecting to the grid for people that aren't already connected to the grid, the options, because of costs of batteries coming down so significantly, to run off-grid are becoming more feasible. There's also this Hunter Valley winery, Alistair Tulloch. They became carbon neutral, the first winery in the Hunter Valley to become carbon neutral. And he worked out all of their kind of embedded carbon inputs, from, you know, the wine bottle caps to the glass to the energy they were using for the winery. And they produced, they were spending $300,000 on electricity, which is their biggest cost as well, but they're now able to provide 72% of their power from the solar panels themselves. But one of the things that he didn't expect is that they were able to advertise their product as being carbon neutral. And this led to a 200% increase in sales because of that labelling, and consumers becoming more and more aware of these types of issues and wanting to support sustainable farms and wanting to see that the ag sector are really participating in these types of initiatives. So I just included this slide. This is a slide from ReAqua, because I know there's a lot of there's a lot of horticulture where you guys are. And so if you looked at, the citrus or almonds and using solar irrigation on these different types of, drip irrigation, you can still expect a payback of under 5 years in general, because the more that you use the solar, so just say you have to irrigate your crops 10 months of a year, the better the paybacks are really. So there's quite a strong business case now, apart from the environmental savings. And I just wanted to quickly touch on large-scale renewables. As our coal-fired power stations are all retiring, we need to be building modern-day power stations. So we've got one in our region, the Renewable Energy Zone in the Central West. There's been a bit of opposition and concern about prime agricultural land being used for these large-scale solar developments and, locking up that land for 25 years. But the photo that you see there with the sheep, that's a farmer in Dubbo who hosts 20 megawatt solar farm Neoens, and that's providing him with a secure secondary income for his property, so that even during a drought, he's still got money coming in to fix his fencing or get contractors in, and that flows onto local economies. The solar panels actually provide shade in the summer, protection from the wind and during lambing season, and it keeps the weeds down in a really cost-efficient manner so that Neo and the solar proponent don't have to spray chemicals as often. And then the top right is an example of combining cropping with solar panels, and it's called agrivoltaics, and it's done quite commonly around the world, places like Japan, Austria, the US, Germany, and that's combining energy production with still producing crops. So there's crops like tomatoes that grow better with a bit of shade. There's research done in, I think, Arizona that showed the yield of tomato plants were a lot higher under the shade of the panels. There's also people that try and grow pollinating species so that you're helping habitats for bees, which help obviously crops in the surrounding areas. But there's lots of, I guess, ways to get around that argument about, do we want land to be used for energy production, or do we want land to be used for food production? You can combine the both. It just takes a bit of additional thought and design, spacing of the panels a bit further apart to allow for tractors to go through, or you might use the tilting panels that when you want to put a tractor through, you put them up vertically, for example. But there are solutions to these types of concerns. And that's pretty much my presentation. So really happy to take any questions or have a discussion, have your thoughts as well. I'll just stop my sharing.
Karin, the one question I've always wanted to know is, what's your daughter's name?
Noah, just N-O-A.
N-O-A, okay, thank you. Because she was in all the pictures you sent me and I wondered what her name was, so that's fine.
Oh, okay, yeah, sorry, should include her.
Okay, anybody got any questions? Oh, Greg Barnes says, take yourself off mute, Greg.
I will do that, Rob. I've got I've got three questions actually, so I'll only ask one at this stage. Now, ammonium nitrate, Karin, that produces a lot of greenhouse gas. It's a pretty powerful greenhouse gas, and they use it a fair bit in agriculture. It takes a hell of a lot of energy to make that ammonium nitrate or other fertilisers. Just wondering if there's any offsets that you've heard of, or any improvement in making the ammonium nitrate so it's not so debilitating for our climate. Thank you.
No, that's a good question. I know with cotton production that fertiliser is where the highest level of carbon emissions comes from, and they have reduced that over the years. But in terms of alternatives or ways of producing it without the kind of emissions and the environmental impacts, not really. I mean, there's lots of work, I'm sure that you're aware of, being done. There's a guy out here in Trangie that's trialling with the University of New South Wales fungi that helps to increase carbon in the soil, and they had a massive increase compared to when you're trying to build it naturally with manures and stuff. It's called Carbon Sequest, or Soil Carbon Co. So yeah, sorry, I don't know enough about the ammonium nitrate and the fertilisers to answer that properly, except that I know that there's lots of other trials going on to try and improve the quality of soil and to reduce the need for those types of fertilizers. Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, can't know everything.
Jeff Lodge, I think you had a question. Jeff's not there.
I did. Thanks, Robert.
Speak
Karin,
up,
I'm
Jeff.
wondering if you can expand on the teething issues you alluded to.
Yep, so one of the biggest ones is the way the system works is that the diesel, if we need water overnight during summer, like we need to keep pumping to fill our reservoirs, the diesel kicks in obviously, and there's a 250 kilowatt CAT generator. So that will work overnight, but when the sun's coming up in the morning or in the evening when the sun's going down or cloudy days, the system will favour the solar energy to produce the power for the pump over the diesel use. But what that means is that the pump in the morning, the pump isn't working at full, I mean the generator, the diesel generator isn't working at full capacity because the solar is still producing energy to help with the power load. So that means that that generator wasn't made to be used at 10% or 15%. I think for efficiency of diesel generators, it's made to work more at 40 to 60% efficiency. So we were getting a lot of glazing. And so what would have been better would have been we're trying to look at battery storage or hydrogen to make up that smaller amount when the solar can't produce the whole load that's required for the pump. But what the company's looking to do now is have 2 smaller diesel generators so that they can work at a lower capacity while the solar is actually producing energy, instead of having a 250 kilowatt generator only working at 10%, and then you get issues with the glazing and stuff like that. So that was one of the bigger ones. We've had a few, our system, because it's over 100 kilowatts, we are accredited as a power station under the Clean Energy Regulator, and that's because of the renewable energy target. And I forgot to mention that. So that means that we're able to sell LGCs, large scale generation certificates, until 2030. And that gives us an additional about $90,000 over the next 3 or 4 years in the sale of these LGCs. So it's similar to STCs when you put a small system on your roof, but that's upfront, whereas the LGCs, you continue to sell them. So we had a few issues working out, because we're off grid and looking at the solar, just how the diesel was displaced with the solar, how to calculate those, and it was quite delayed in the process. And the other thing is that the computer controllers between the diesel generator electric motor and the solar panels were in a little shed, and with very, very, very hot summers that we've had over the last 2 years, the computer was kind of shutting down at when it was 50 degrees in there, when it's really meant to be up to 80 degrees, it keeps working, but it just was shutting down and we weren't sure. We think it was the heat. So they've now put in like an air vent and a little air cooler for when it's very, very hot. But yeah, so there's been a few teething issues like that.
If I believe you had another question about the funding for the project.
What's that, sorry?
I believe Jeff had another question about the funding for the project.
Yes, I've got a question about the funding of the project. Thanks for that prompt, Rob. If I can go back to the LGCs, I'd be interested to know the market, how you went about selling the LGCs.
Yeah, so we used a third party who works between ourselves and the Clean Energy Regulator, and they're called Green Energy Traders. So what they do is you can either sell at the spot price through them, or we booked in a 5-year contract, and after the 5 years it goes to the spot price, and they give you a price for what they think that the price of certificates will be over the 5 years. And we're very lucky we did that, because at the moment we're getting something like $68 per LGC, whereas the spot price is more like $34 at the moment. So that's why it's providing quite a good income. Our renewable energy target was pretty much met this year, which means the price of LGCs have fallen significantly, because there's no need to incentivize wind farms or the solar farms to produce that energy anymore, because we met our target. So it's unfortunately not having a future RET is a bit of a barrier and doesn't help, you know, farmers wanting to put in large systems, or people, you know, doesn't help to incentivize and provide certainty to the system.
Karin, why did you set up the conference? The one...
Yeah, because, you know, when I worked for government, I worked for used to be the Office of Environment Heritage in renewable energy, and, you know, my role was increasing generation of renewables within the state, and we ran, I recognised that solar pumping was a bit of a, was an interest. There was a guy that came from Sydney who had a battery and a solar business, and he met a farmer down in Sydney and said, "I'll come up to Narromine and you get a few of your mates and we'll talk about whether we can use solar for your pumping." And he showed up at the pub in Narromine thinking he'll get 3 or 4 people, and 30 people were there. And then I ran a seminar, because there weren't any large scale systems at the time, but I ran a seminar with people like Cotton Australia or New South Wales Farmers talking about the theory of how solar irrigating can work. And we got 50 to 60 farmers at Warren, which is this tiny town 2 hours from me out that way in Narrabri. And then there was our neighbour put the first ever 100 kilowatt solar diesel irrigation pump before us, and we got 130 people to that field day, and that was people that travelled from South Australia, Queensland. So it really demonstrated to me there was a gap in the market of knowledge, of showing farmers what's possible. And so I guess the conference for me was a natural next step, that there wasn't a huge amount of coordination between the ag bodies or governments to run something like this. So I guess I wanted to be able to tell our story. I wanted other farmers that I knew were doing fantastic things with renewables to be able to tell their stories. And I got a committee together, which includes government, you know, Farmers for Climate Action on that committee as well, to kind of help me bring together this conference. So that's kind of how it started, I suppose, that there was just a gap in the market to fulfill farmers learning from one another on this type of area.
And so have they been learning from one another?
Yeah. That was one of the most positive feedback. That's the feedback I received from the conferences, that people loved to hear from other farmers about what they've been doing. And since then, you know, I've connected people with the different speakers I've had, the farmer speakers, with, you know, radio stations, or other farmers have called me wanting to know more. And so there's a lot more that needs to happen, obviously. And, you know, the type of thing you're doing now will help those conversations to happen, and for people to learn what others are doing, what the mistakes they made, how do they learn from each other's examples, I suppose.
I notice we've just had Helen Reynolds, who is a former president of the Goulburn Valley Environment Group, join us. So maybe Helen's got a question.
Hi, Rob. Yes, sorry I'm late. No questions yet. Happy to just listen in.
Okay.
Nothing like being put on the spot.
Yeah, I tend to do that. What about you, Greg? You're waving your hand. Greg Barnes.
This is the second of 3 questions I have. Is the air temperature around the panels higher? Because in Shepparton, that was one of the theories they were expounding. So did they do any tests on that?
They haven't done any tests on the air temperature around the panels being high, because we don't grow crops that close to the panels. But I've spoken to the Clean Energy Council about that heat islanding effect, and it can be, you know, any surface that the sun is shining on will heat up. So the air temperature around the panels can be 2 to 3 degrees warmer, but this dissipates. I think there was a Californian study that the air temperature after 30 metres dissipates back to the normal anyway. And interestingly, with that agrivoltaics I was talking about, growing crops under solar panels, the transpiration from the crops actually makes the solar panels cooler and more efficient. So they actually help the solar panels to produce more energy by growing biomass underneath.
What's your third question, Greg? You might as well jump in with it.
Okay. Now, you said it would take about 5 years to pay back the solar panels.
Yep.
When do you have to, how long is it before you have to replace those solar panels? And what's the equation like you know, the amount of carbon produced in making these solar panels. There's three. Oh, sorry, snuck them in, Rob.
Yeah. So our system, the 5-year payback and the economics of it was based on a 25-year life of those solar panels. So by the time, you know, 25 years comes, who knows what the advances in technologies will be. There might be super more efficient solar panels, or thin ones, or ones that you can roll out, or transparent ones that you can grow crops under. So, you know, who knows what's going to happen at the end of that. In terms of the embedded energy, there was a film by Michael Moore recently, The Planet of the Humans, which is based on 2012 data. So I think it said that making the solar panels produces so much carbon that you don't actually repay it in the 25 years or something like that. But the actual stats now are more like a 2 to 3 year payback for solar panels for the amount of carbon that's produced in creating them.
Jeff Lodge has got another question.
Can I just add a comment in terms of the embedded energy? There's been a significant shift in reducing that embedded energy because many of the solar panel manufacturers have their own solar farms. So typically now you're looking at less than 1 year of embedded energy to break even. The other thing in terms of the serviceable life of the solar panels, whilst most commercial farms are looking at a 25 to 30 year serviceable life, they lose about 1% a year. So in theory, it can be operating at 50% capacity after 50 years. So the notion of pulling out the solar panels at 25 or 30 years is actually a very conservative position. And given that there, in many applications, there's not a shortage of space, you can actually leave that technology and that infrastructure in situ for a 50-year time frame. It's the inverters that have a much shorter life. So I'd be interested in knowing Karin's comments on the serviceable life of the inverters for the system that she has. Would you be able to provide any insights into how long and what the replacement timeframe would be for your system?
I think, but maybe don't quote me on this, that the guarantee on the inverter is either 8 or 10 years. Does that, Jeff, does that sound similar to what inverters? Yeah, so I guess we will have to replace that one. But yeah, I'm not across that detail, unfortunately.
So typically systems now around 15 years is the serviceable life, maybe 20 years. 10, 12 years ago when solar panels were first hitting mainstream, you were looking at between 1 and 5 year warranties and expected lives of around 10 years. So the technology has improved, but you know, you're still talking about in the serviceable life of your system, I would expect you would have to replace them at least once.
Yeah.
How would you know when the inverter's not working, Jeff? Mine's been there about 11 years and it seems to be working, but I wouldn't know if it's not.
So there's two levels, I guess I could answer that question. One is a domestic system and one is a commercial. The commercial one, I'm sure there would be monitoring systems that you have in place as part of your routine operation and maintenance, Karin, so you would be knowing what your system is producing. Likewise, if you've got a domestic system, early systems were less sophisticated with less monitoring. So I know the system that you've got, Derek, there's very little information that is telling you what is happening. So you need to do things manually. So you need to look at your inverter to see what your total output is at any given time, and then go back after a period of time. So that might be a fortnight, and you would come back and read what your total output is. You divide that by the number of days from when you did your first reading, and you can then look at what your daily output is. And the system that you've got, you should be able to establish what is a typical output. So if it's north-facing panels in Shepparton, if you've got a 1 kilowatt system, you can expect the annual output is 4 kilowatt hours a day. In winter, it's 2 kilowatt hours a day, and if it's in the height of summer, it's 6 kilowatt hours a day. So that formula will tell you what your system is expected to be producing, You then reduce 1% of that output for every year that the system has been operating. And then you'd have a look at your panels, and if you're in a dusty area and the panels are dirty, you might reduce another couple of percent. So without the sophisticated monitoring, with the back of an envelope, you can do very reliable monitoring as to whether your system is working. This is the advice we give our clients, and we say before you get a technician, get your pen, get your envelope, make those calculations, and you can work out whether it's operating close to the mark. And if not, then you might find that you've got some problem where a string might have popped, and you might find that it's operating at 50% capacity, and it might be as simple as a plug has come loose and it needs to be pushed back in. But as soon as you're doing anything that's touching the system, you really need an electrician.
Excuse me, Jeff, we've got a question from Alfred up there. So.
Yeah, Jeff, I had one of your earlier systems, as you know, and my electronics inverter conked out and it completely stopped, Derek. So that was easy to find out that it didn't work.
Yeah, my one's sort of sitting there. It still seems to be, it's got lights on, and it hasn't. It still seems to be functioning okay. So I guess that's if it, there would be obvious signs that it's not working, I guess. Yeah.
I was looking for a replacement, and they were going to charge me $1,000, and I found on the internet one for $100.
Oh, there you go.
Which was old. I mean, it was new, but it had been sitting in the box from you for about 10 years, but still has now worked for 4 years. So.
Yeah.
Karen, do you have any problem up there with dust on your panels?
Yeah. So I've got quite a bit of dust on.
So what do you do about that?
Well, we've spaced the solar panels wide enough, wider than they're meant to be, given the shade, so that we can get a water truck through and water them. But I think we've oversized our solar panels at 500 kilowatts for a 250 kilowatt motor, because we wanted it to produce enough energy during the early morning and late evening peaks. Shoulder periods. So we didn't end up washing it down. We felt that the drop in efficiency, because there was more energy than that was required for the pump anyway, it would kind of equate to what we needed. But there was a lot of dust on it, and I got asked what the drop in efficiency was, but we never measured it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you offered another question.
Yeah, Karen, do you irrigate under your panels? It looked very green there with the sheep.
Oh no, that's not my solar farm. That's
somebody else's.
Yeah. So he hosts a solar development from a company called Neoen. So he's able to graze his sheep. And interestingly, he found that during the 2.5 years of drought, he only had to buy fodder for his sheep for 3 months, because the water would condense on the solar panels, and because they were tilted, the water would run down and feed a line of grass. He'd had enough greenery to feed his sheep over the drought because of the solar panels.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
What about you, Mick 8? You got a question or not? No question from Mick 8. Oh, Greg Barnes has got another question.
Rob, my wife is plying me with questions and making me look good. She wants to know, Debbie, recycling of solar panels in inverters, is there anything in there that can be recycled, or is it just or take them down to the tip when you're done with them?
Jeff might have an answer to this. I think at the moment, I think there are quite toxic chemicals that are within the panels that, all these big solar farms are going to be coming to an end. There are companies that are looking at recycling all the components of solar panels, but there isn't, I don't think, a broad solution yet. And companies like, ARENA, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency that government helps fund, are putting a lot of money into trying to look at recycling of solar panels. So at the moment, there's no real solution that I know of, even though there are companies that do it on a smaller scale. There's one in Queensland, but hopefully we'll have a solution. There's a solution when the end of a lot of these solar farms come to their end. But like Jeff said, you know, just because it's the end of the 25 years doesn't mean that's the end of the power production. You might just add more panels to make up for the difference.
Jeff's got a comment.
I do, Rob. In terms of the recycling, I guess there's two aspects of it. One is repurposing or reusing, and the other is dismantling the components and recycling. In terms of the recycling, it's very much an early part of the industry, and I'm aware in South Australia there's one company that is doing it, and Karen's mentioned one in Queensland. So it's very early days. So it is problematic at the moment, and a lot of product is going to landfill. In terms of repurposing, it is also problematic because of the regulatory components that underpin the industry. And essentially, if you've got a solar system that is on your roof and you choose to upgrade with a more efficient system, those panels cannot be reused on any system that is connected to the grid. It is problematic. And the main reason is not a safety issue, it's a regulatory issue, because the manufacturer of the solar panel has to maintain their registration of their compliance. When panels are 2-3 years of age, they're out of vogue, there's new and more efficient systems, so the manufacturers do not renew their registrations. So therefore, they're not legally permitted to be connected to the grid. That's the main driver that is preventing the reuse of the panels. The second one is some panels do not satisfy the fire rating, and therefore they're not permitted to be used on the grid. But without a doubt, the biggest issue is the fact that the panel manufacturers are not renewing their registration, so therefore they can't be reused. So what it does do is it opens up the possibility of off-grid or battery storage, but it also then becomes problematic because they won't get the STC or the LGC certificates because they won't be accredited. So there are additional costs associated with it. There was a good and a simple report that was done under an energy hub down at La Trobe, and have recently published a report. It's only about a 3-page report, which summarises those issues and an appeal to the government to review the regulatory components so that these panels can be repurposed. We are seeing more and more people dismantling their solar panel systems, both domestic and commercial, where roof space is a limiting factor and people are putting on new ones. That in itself is problematic because there was already carbon credits that were assigned to those systems that have been traded and are now being dismantled. So we have a false accounting system that is assuming carbon credits which are not going to be achieved because systems are being prematurely decommissioned. A good issue for politicians to address.
Any more questions from anybody?
Yeah, just a question and a comment, I guess, Rob. The question about maintenance and cleaning. I see there are companies that are specialised in cleaning panels, and I just wonder whether they're worth investing in, or whether you just climb up on the roof and clean them. And interesting to know what Karin does on her system. And just in terms of a comment, just thinking about what Jeff was saying, it was always my intention, given its 25-year life, was to say, well, 25-year life, after 12 years, I'll install another system of about the same size or bigger. And then, so every 12 years, I'm making an investment and replacing those panels. So I've always got to, I'm sort of leapfrogging. So after 25, 30 years, I'll probably take the 1 kilowatt system I've got down, but I've always got something going. So the question is just on cleaning the panels. I did get up and clean my panels a while ago, and they had lichen growing on them. I thought, oh, that's not too good. That's gonna decrease the efficiency. So that tells you how often I clean them. But I just wonder about commercial cleaning services, or what Karin does about cleaning them and how often, etc.
Yeah, so with our system, I guess they're tilted in a way that they should be self-cleaning. So when it rains, it washes all the dust off. But obviously the last 2 years we had the drought. So we did have a lot of dust storms and a lot of dust settling on the panels. And we like I was saying before, we did space the panels wide enough so we could get the water truck along and just give it a quick wash. But my partner didn't feel like we needed to do that because we oversized our system and there was enough power really to continue to pump the pump. But, you know, we would do that if we had to, if we felt the efficiency was dropping too much. Yeah, but there was, if anyone's on Twitter, Simon Holmes of Court, there was actually quite a big thread under a question that he asked about cleaning, and people were mentioning that they didn't feel that it was quite useful. But yeah,
good. I'll look for that. Thank you.
Okay, folks, I think we might wrap up because I don't have any more questions and I don't know if anybody else has, but I'd like to thank you very much, Karin. That's been wonderful.
That's okay. Thanks so much for having me.
It's hard to applaud when we're doing this virtually, but all I can say is thank you very much. Oh, they're all clapping. Yeah, we're clapping here.
Thank you.
I'd ask people not to forget August 29, we're going to have Simon Kerr, who's from Music for a Warming World. So he's talking about living with the dying forest. So thank you, Karin. I appreciate that. That's wonderful. And hope things go well in Narromine for you.
Thank you, and keep up these great conversations about, you know, climate and what to do on